The clock read 12:30 p.m. in New York, and the Blue Plate restaurant was beginning to come alive with the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of lively conversations. The aroma of sophisticated dishes mixed with freshly brewed coffee, creating an atmosphere where elegance and informality danced a delicate tango. Among the customers, faces expressed a mix of satisfaction and disinterest, but one stood out: Thomas Abernathy, an executive whose corporate achievements had made him an icon in his own mind. He walked through the entrance like a king in his castle, oblivious to his surroundings. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit with a silk tie that showcased his subtle ostentation. The glint in Thomas's eyes reflected not just ambition, but also a deep disdain for those he considered inferior. "These people who serve, they exist to serve us," he had once boasted at a shareholders' meeting, his voice full of contempt. That day, as he sat at his table, Thomas cast a scornful look at Sarah, a waitress who moved gracefully among the tables. With a welcoming smile, she served customers, her eyes shining with a genuine kindness that contrasted with the coldness of the elite around her. Thomas saw her as nothing more than a piece on a chessboard, a mere servant in his twisted view. "This service is unacceptable," he declared, his voice cutting as he turned to the manager. "How do you expect me to recommend this place when the service quality is so low?" Those words fell like stones upon Sarah, making her flinch for an instant. She took a deep breath, but her steady, determined gaze revealed the indignation simmering within her. What Thomas didn't realize was the strength Sarah carried. Every insult she received didn't break her. Instead, it fueled her determination. While he engaged in conversations about profits and status, Sarah dedicated herself to doing her job with excellence. Her heart pulsed with empathy, and she genuinely connected with every customer, especially the children, who beamed with joy in her presence. But Sarah's world was bleak. She knew that her daily struggle against prejudice and discrimination wasn't limited to a single day or a single arrogant customer. It was a vicious cycle that needed to be broken. A cycle that forced her to carry the heavy burden of devaluation coming from above. Indeed, every smile she offered hid a deep desire to be seen and heard, to be more than just a waitress in an elite restaurant. At that table, Thomas's arrogance seemed unshakable, but Sarah felt that his contempt could turn into an opportunity. If he thought he could trample on her dignity without consequences, she was determined to prove that respect is earned not by social position, but by character and humanity. So, as Thomas settled into his superiority, Sarah began to plan her silent response. With every dish she served and every interaction she had, she was preparing for a battle that neither he nor she imagined was about to begin. And so, the story of an encounter marked by disdain and inequality began to unfold, like a thread weaving into a fabric of empathy and challenges. After the devastating encounter with Thomas, Sarah plunged headfirst into her work, determined not to let his arrogance overshadow her spirit. Breakfast service became a true spectacle, with artistic dishes presented with a touch of charm. She knew that with every smile she offered, she was creating a deep connection with the customers who frequented the Blue Plate. For her, every cup of coffee and every dish served was an opportunity to make a difference, not just in her day, but in the lives of those around her. In the quiet hours between services, Sarah watched Thomas from afar, like a spy on a battlefield. He sat at his usual table, surrounded by admiring executives and customers who leaned in to listen to him, as if he were an oracle. However, Sarah noticed something peculiar. Despite his confidence, there was an emptiness in Thomas's eyes. He spoke eloquently, but his gestures were always imbued with a subtext of insecurity. Why does he need to feel so superior? Sarah wondered, deciding that the answer was not something she could discover alone. With each new visit to the restaurant, Thomas continued to scorn the staff and belittle Sarah's work. But there was something in his persistence that inspired her. She began to build a plan, a way to not just ignore the negativity, but to transform that disdain into something meaningful. If he couldn't see the value of her work, perhaps she could show him the truth through her actions. With this idea in mind, Sarah connected more deeply with the other customers. At each table, she asked about their lives, listened to their stories, and shared laughs, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. She realized that children were her biggest allies. By interacting with them, she became a beacon of joy, and every smile she received was a personal victory against the coldness that Thomas represented. "Hi, would you like to try our famous chocolate sundae?" Sarah asked a curly-haired little girl who was hiding behind her mother. The sparkle in the girl's eyes warmed Sarah's heart. The little girl nodded excitedly, and within minutes, the table was filled with laughter and voices. This fed Sarah's strength, and she knew that, deep down, she was planting seeds of empathy in a place that often seemed immune to them. Meanwhile, Thomas seemed not to notice the change in his surroundings. He continued to be the king of his small empire, almost always surrounded by a cloud of arrogance. His disdain for the waitresses and everyone he considered beneath him only intensified. On one of his visits, he allowed himself a look of scorn as he spoke to his friend, pointing at Sarah, who was conversing with a table of customers. "Look at her," Thomas said, his voice full of venom. "She thinks she can be friends with everyone, when in reality, she's just a waitress. That's not worthy of respect." His words were a punch to Sarah's stomach, but they didn't knock her down. If what Thomas allowed himself to be was just a tyrant, then she had to be the opposite. With each interaction, she began to feel stronger, not just in relation to Thomas, but in relation to herself. She was determined to show that a person's worth was not measured by the title they held, but by the kindness they were capable of offering. The idea of a plan began to take shape in Sarah's mind. She knew she needed to find a way to connect with Thomas, to understand the man behind the facade. It was a risky task, but she was willing to try. So, during one of her shifts while serving coffee, she decided to approach him. "Mr. Abernathy," she began, her heart beating fast. "Have you ever considered the importance of a smile on a difficult day? Sometimes, a little kindness can make a big difference." Thomas looked at her, surprised, his eyes shining with a mixture of confusion and contempt. "That's a lost cause, girl. Do you really believe your smiles are enough to change anything in the world?" He laughed, but there was a slight tremor in his voice, as if his confidence was beginning to crumble. "Sometimes, the most impactful changes come from the small things," Sarah replied, firmly but without hostility. "Just because you don't see value in it doesn't mean it doesn't exist." And with that, she walked away, leaving Thomas in a state of unwanted reflection. Days passed and Sarah continued to evolve. She intensified her interactions with the children, befriending the little ones and becoming a maternal figure to many. At the same time, she remained attentive to Thomas. He seemed increasingly frustrated, but also a little intrigued. There were moments when he watched her from afar, like a predator reconsidering its target. Sarah knew the battle was just beginning, but she was ready. With every smile and every laugh she shared, she was creating an invisible network of support and understanding around her, determined to make Thomas realize the worth of the people he despised. Thus, Sarah's struggle became not just about the individual fight against prejudice, but about the collective fight for dignity and respect. And as she prepared to face another visit from Thomas, she felt a certainty within her that, even if he didn't see it, her impact was just beginning to manifest. Hope and resilience became her weapons, and transformation was on its way. Days turned into weeks, and New York's summer heat began to cool, but the tension at the Blue Plate was about to boil over. Thomas Abernathy, still wrapped in his cloak of superiority, continued his routine of disdain, always looking for new opportunities to belittle Sarah. With each visit, his arrogance became more palpable, and Sarah, in turn, was increasingly determined not to let it affect her. One afternoon, the restaurant was crowded, the murmur of customers mixing with the clinking of cutlery. Sarah moved nimbly between tables, displaying a genuine smile. However, Thomas was at his usual table, surrounded by business colleagues. He spotted Sarah and, with a disdainful tone, yelled, "Waitress, could you come over here? Or are you too busy trying to be friends with all the customers?" His friend's scornful laughter echoed through the dining room, and the attention of other customers turned to Sarah, who felt the ground open beneath her. She took a deep breath, drawing strength from the interactions she had built. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy. What can I get for you?" she replied, maintaining a professional tone despite the pain the humiliation caused. But this only provoked more laughter from the group. "Perhaps you could bring some dignity to this place," he taunted, caressing the menu with contempt. "Or perhaps you should remember that what you do is just a job." Thomas's words cut like a knife, but instead of letting herself be defeated, Sarah channeled her indignation into determination. It wasn't just a personal fight. It was a battle against a worldview that despised the humble and exalted the powerful. The escalation of hostility didn't stop there. Thomas, realizing the impact of his words, decided to intensify his attack. He addressed the restaurant manager, a woman who had always been receptive, but who now seemed reluctant to confront such an important customer. "Start watching the waitress," he said scornfully. "She doesn't have what it takes to be here. If her service doesn't improve, maybe it's time to consider an alternative." The atmosphere in the restaurant became heavy. Sarah was aware that management was beginning to hesitate. Her heart raced, torn between the urge to scream and the need to stay strong. She felt like a target, a symbol of everything Thomas despised. That afternoon, management called Sarah to discuss the complaints. The manager, a woman who had always admired Sarah's dedication, was nervous, trying to balance the pressure from a valuable customer with the loyalty she felt for the waitress. "Sarah, we have some concerns about your performance," the manager said, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Abernathy made some complaints. He mentioned he wasn't satisfied with your service." The words were a blow to her stomach. "But I always try my best," Sarah defended, her voice trembling with emotion. "I connect with customers. Isn't that important?" "I know, and I appreciate your effort," the manager replied, but the hesitation in her eyes betrayed her. "But he's a valuable customer, and we need to consider his words." The mention of Thomas as a valuable customer sparked a wave of indignation in Sarah. The pressure was building, and the challenge intensified. While Sarah tried to defend her position, Thomas was far away, smiling. He knew he was winning, shaping her into a problematic employee in the eyes of management. After the meeting, as she returned to work, Sarah felt anger grow within her. The reality was that Thomas had managed to turn the situation in his favor. But she wasn't willing to give up. A revolution was forming within her, a desire to fight not just for herself, but for all those who were treated as invisible. Amidst the humiliation, a moment of light emerged when a child at the next table smiled at her. "Hi, did you bring my sundae?" a boy asked, and it warmed Sarah's heart. "Of course, a special sundae, just for you," she replied, her voice filled with joy. In that moment, Sarah decided she wouldn't let herself be defeated. The boy's smile was all she needed to remember her worth and the importance of her fight. With every interaction, every smile, she was challenging Thomas's narrative, proving that dignity was not defined by status, but by the ability to touch the lives of others. Thus, as the battle continued and tension grew, Sarah was determined to use every interaction as a shield against Thomas's hostility. Her fight was far from over, but she knew that true strength came from within. And so, the hope of a brighter future began to form on the horizon. As autumn approached, the atmosphere at the Blue Plate began to change. The fresh morning air brought a sense of renewal, but inside the restaurant, tension remained latent. Sarah was increasingly determined to overcome the obstacles imposed by Thomas Abernathy, but the environment became more hostile with each visit from the arrogant executive. One afternoon, the restaurant was crowded, the sound of dishes being served and customers chatting animatedly filling the space. Sarah was especially lively, interacting with the children and doing her best to maintain a welcoming atmosphere. However, Thomas was at his usual table, surrounded by business colleagues. He spotted Sarah and, with a disdainful tone, yelled, "Waitress, could you hurry up? I've been waiting for my order for hours." The restaurant paused for a moment, and all eyes turned to Sarah, who felt the ground open beneath her feet. She took a deep breath, drawing strength from the interactions she had built. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy. Your order is on its way," she replied, maintaining a professional tone despite the pain the humiliation caused. "Perhaps you could bring some dignity to this place," he taunted, caressing the menu with contempt. "Or perhaps you should remember that what you do is just a job." Thomas's words cut like a knife, but instead of letting herself be defeated, Sarah decided she wouldn't give in. Determined not to let the provocation affect her, Sarah withdrew to prepare Thomas's order. When she returned, she ran into the manager, who was watching her with a worried expression. "Sarah, can we talk for a moment?" She nodded, her heart racing. They entered the meeting room, a small but welcoming space. The manager began, "I've received some complaints about you, especially from Mr. Abernathy. He mentioned he's not satisfied with your service." Sarah felt her indignation grow. "That's not true. I always strive to do my job as best I can. Connecting with customers is important." The passion in her voice was evident, but the manager seemed hesitant. "I know you do a good job, but we need to consider our customers' opinions. Mr. Abernathy is a valuable customer," the manager replied, her gaze betraying a mix of concern and empathy. "He threatens to take his business elsewhere if we're not up to par." Pressure was building, and the feeling of being cornered made Sarah uneasy. With each passing day, Thomas seemed to grow more arrogant, and Sarah felt her space being invaded. When night fell, the restaurant was bustling again. Thomas had brought an even larger group of colleagues, determined to make Sarah's life hell. "I hope the dishes are as good as the waitress who serves them," he provoked, laughing with his friends. Anger and shame mixed within Sarah, but she was unwilling to give in. When she finally had a free moment, she decided to retreat to the kitchen, where her colleague Priya was chopping vegetables. "Are you okay?" Priya asked, noticing Sarah's worried expression. "I don't know how much more I can take. He keeps attacking me, and management seems to do nothing to help me," Sarah confided, her voice full of frustration. "You're stronger than you think. Remember who you are and the impact you have on people. Don't let an arrogant man define your worth," Priya encouraged her, her words a balm amidst the growing tension. Determined not to let Thomas crush her, Sarah decided to confront him. When he made another sarcastic comment about her service, she approached his table. "Mr. Abernathy, I understand you have high expectations, but respect is a two-way street. I'm here to provide a pleasant experience, and your attitude is not helping." The look of surprise on Thomas's face was almost gratifying. He didn't expect resistance, and for an instant, his arrogance wavered. But he quickly regained his composure and replied, "Respect is something that must be earned. Do you really think you deserve it?" "I deserve as much respect as anyone else here," Sarah stated, her voice firm. "We all have a role to play, and I am more than just a waitress. I am here to do my job in the best possible way, and that includes treating everyone with dignity." The tension at the table became palpable. Thomas's colleagues, who had been laughing, now seemed hesitant. What had been an evening of laughter turned into a moment of reflection. To Sarah's surprise, she realized she wasn't alone. Other customers began to look, and a murmur of support started to grow around her. With a determined smile, Sarah left Thomas's table, feeling a wave of relief. She had put herself in a vulnerable position, but she had reaffirmed her worth and dignity. As she walked away, she saw some people smiling in encouragement, and this gave her even more strength. That night, as she cleaned tables and chatted with her other customers, Sarah felt at peace. There was a new sparkle in her eyes, a renewed determination not to let Thomas's negativity dominate her. She was tired of feeling small and invisible. The next day, the fight continued. Sarah decided she would talk to management again, but this time with a strategy. She prepared solid arguments to defend her point of view and was ready to challenge the narrative Thomas had created. She didn't intend to be a victim. On the contrary, she wanted to be an agent of change. As she prepared for work, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and made a promise to herself. Today, you will show who you really are, she whispered to her reflection. With this determination, she entered the restaurant, ready to face whatever came. The day began bustling, and Thomas's imposing presence was felt as soon as he entered. With an arrogant smile, he headed to his table, but this time Sarah was prepared. When he called her, instead of hesitating, she approached with confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Abernathy. How can I help you today?" Her voice was firm, and she was decided not to back down. "Waitress, I need better service today. I don't want any problems," he said, trying to intimidate her. "Understood. I will do my best as always," Sarah replied, maintaining a steady gaze. As she walked away, she felt the strength of her words resonate within her. The battle was far from over, but Sarah had taken an important step towards claiming her voice and the respect she so deserved. The fight for dignity was just beginning, and she was ready to face it. As the day's heat dissipated and autumn finally settled in New York, the atmosphere at the Blue Plate was charged with expectation and tension. Sarah, now more determined than ever, felt that the battle against Thomas Abernathy was about to reach a critical point. The restaurant's atmosphere, once a mix of joy and disdain, now pulsed with an electric energy, as if everyone knew something significant was about to happen. After the direct confrontation with Thomas, Sarah experienced a wave of empowerment. However, the reality of her job continued to be a battlefield. The arrogant executive had become more influential in his criticism, and management was increasingly cautious regarding his status as a valuable customer. In a recent meeting, the manager had mentioned that the pressure on Sarah was growing, but she wasn't willing to let it defeat her. Deep down, a voice told her she couldn't back down, that she had to keep fighting. That afternoon, as the restaurant filled with the tempting aroma of well-made dishes, Thomas arrived with a group of colleagues, already establishing his aura of superiority. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come, determined to maintain her composure under Thomas's critical gaze. She knew that every smile she offered to customers and every warm interaction was a small victory in her personal fight. "Waitress," he called, his voice echoing through the dining room. "Can you bring me service that's worth what I'm paying? Or should I find another waitress?" The contempt in his voice spread through the space, and the gazes of other customers turned to Sarah. She approached the table, her heart racing, but her determination was unshakable. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy. What can I get for you?" Sarah's reply was filled with professionalism, but inside, her adrenaline surged. "I want a rare steak, and please, don't bring me a piece of meat that looks like it was cooked by you, all right?" Thomas's tone was dismissive, and he paused to observe her reaction. The laughter of his colleagues was like a poison spreading through the air, but Sarah struggled to remain calm. "Understood, Mr. Abernathy. I'll make sure your order is perfect," she replied, her voice firm, but her heart was heavy. With every word from Thomas, she felt the pressure building, as if she were carrying the weight of all the disdain she had ever faced. But there would be a moment that changed everything. As Sarah headed to the kitchen, insecurity began to creep into her mind. Thomas's words echoed in her head, flooding her with doubts. What if I really don't have what it takes? An inner voice began to scream that she wouldn't make it. In the kitchen, Sarah found herself pausing for a moment, a whirlwind of emotions overwhelming her. She inhaled deeply, smelling the fresh spices and cooking food. Looking around, she observed colleagues who were striving, doing the best they could with the resources they had. And there, amidst it all, she remembered why she was fighting. It wasn't just for her, but for all those who worked hard to offer quality service, even when they were undervalued. Thomas's order was prepared with care, and Sarah returned to the table with the dish, her heart pounding. "Here is your steak, Mr. Abernathy. I hope it meets your expectations," she said, placing the plate on the table with a smile, even though her voice trembled slightly. He looked at the meat, then at Sarah with a cynical smile on his lips. "Looks like you managed to do something right today," he shot back, and the humiliation spread like poison. She could feel the negative energy emanating from him, and, for a moment, she almost crumbled. But instead of giving in to self-pity, Sarah remembered what Priya had said. "You're stronger than you think." She took a deep breath, and with a forced smile replied, "I'm glad you liked it, Mr. Abernathy. If you need anything else, I'll be around." The rest of the night passed with more provocations from Thomas, but Sarah held firm. However, the pressure was building, and the tension between them seemed more intense than ever. At the end of the night, as the restaurant began to empty, Sarah felt relieved, but at the same time, a weight pressed down on her. The day had been exhausting, and what should have been a victory had turned into an emotional battle. As she said goodbye to her colleagues, Sarah began to feel that the weight of Thomas's words was affecting not only her, but also her confidence. Upon returning home, tears began to stream down her face. "Why is this happening to me?" she wondered, her heart broken by the constant humiliation. The idea that Thomas might be right, that she wasn't good enough, plagued her. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself facing a crisis of confidence. What should have been a simple daily interaction had turned into an emotional torment. But amidst the despair, she remembered the smile of a child that had brightened her night, and this made her reflect. "I can't let one person's negativity define who I am." In the following weeks, the pressure increased. Thomas seemed increasingly determined to make her a target, and Sarah found herself battling a growing sense of demotivation. The resilience she had cultivated began to fade. She felt alone, and the oppressive atmosphere of the restaurant left her exhausted. One evening, after an endless series of provocations, Sarah sat in a corner of the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Despair enveloped her, and she began to wonder if it was still worth fighting. What to do when all dignity seemed to be stolen? It was in this moment of vulnerability that Priya found her. "Sarah, are you okay?" she asked, noticing the sadness on her friend's face. "I'm trying to be strong, but I don't know how much more I can take," Sarah replied, her voice filled with pain. "Thomas makes me feel so small." Priya sat beside her. "You're not small. You're an incredible person, and you have to believe that. Don't let one man's arrogance define your worth. We'll face this together." Priya's words were a balm to Sarah's soul. She realized she wasn't alone, that she had people by her side willing to support her. In that moment, a new flame of determination began to shine within her. She couldn't give up, not just for herself, but for all those who faced the same kind of disdain. Thus, Sarah made a promise to herself. The next time Thomas attacked her, she would not only defend herself, but also show him and others that dignity was non-negotiable. She knew the battle was far from over, but she was willing to fight with all her heart, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved respect. It was time to transform pain into power and shame into strength. The atmosphere at the Blue Plate became tense and electrically charged in the following weeks. Sarah prepared for what she felt would be the final confrontation with Thomas Abernathy. Each day, the confidence she had found began to solidify, and she knew the time to stand up and fight had come. Determined to defend herself and claim her dignity, she felt ready to face the man who had become the symbol of everything that was wrong with how people were treated. One evening, the restaurant was especially crowded, with a constant flow of customers coming and going. Sarah was at her best, flowing between tables with a welcoming smile, interacting with customers and bringing joy to every corner. However, Thomas's presence loomed over her like a shadow, and her heart raced whenever he entered the dining room. When she finally saw him seated at his table, surrounded by colleagues who laughed and made sarcastic comments, Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. But this time, she wouldn't let herself be defeated. With renewed determination, she approached Thomas's table, her gaze focused and steady. "Good evening, Mr. Abernathy. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice clear and decisive. "You can start by telling me why the service is still so bad." He shot back, his contempt evident. "I expected better from such a famous restaurant." "I will do my best to ensure your experience today is excellent," Sarah replied, her tone unshakable. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the pressure of all eyes on her felt like a weight. But she held firm in her intention not to let him destabilize her. As Sarah walked away to prepare the order, a wave of support began to spread among the other customers. She noticed some murmuring words of encouragement as she passed, and this gave her courage. That night wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been disregarded and belittled. While in the kitchen, Sarah decided she wouldn't just be a waitress that night. She would become an advocate for all who were treated with disdain. With every dish she prepared, she channeled her strength and determination, remembering all the warm interactions she had with customers. Every smile she had previously offered was a weapon against Thomas's negativity. When she returned to Thomas's table with the order, her heart raced, but not from fear. It was an adrenaline that emanated from her new determination. "Here is your order, Mr. Abernathy. I hope it meets your expectations," she said, delivering the plate with a confident smile. Thomas looked at the meat, then at Sarah with a cynical smile. "Looks like you managed to do something right today," he shot back, and the humiliation spread like poison. But instead of feeling diminished, Sarah felt invincible. "Respect is a two-way street, Mr. Abernathy. I'm not here to receive compliments, but to ensure all customers have the best possible experience. That includes you," she replied, her tone firm. Silence fell over the table. Thomas's colleagues were paralyzed, surprised by Sarah's boldness. The atmosphere had changed, and the interaction that was once filled with contempt now became a moment of reflection. Thomas, caught off guard, felt the pressure of the situation shift. "Do you really think you can talk to me like that? That you can teach me what respect is?" he retorted, his arrogance beginning to crumble. There was a palpable tension in the air, and even some of the other customers began to look at him with curious faces. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied, maintaining her firm gaze. "Everyone deserves dignity, regardless of what they do. You may be a valuable customer, but that doesn't give you the right to belittle the people who work here." Customers began to murmur in support of Sarah, and the tension that was once exclusively hers now spread among everyone present. The battle was no longer just between her and Thomas, but between collective dignity and arrogance. Thomas, now clearly shaken, tried to regain his composure. "You'll regret this," he threatened, but his voice no longer held the same confidence. "Regret what? Defending dignity? Never," Sarah replied, her eyes burning with determination. With that, she turned and walked away, knowing she had done something significant, something that would change how those around her saw her. Applause began to echo through the restaurant, and Sarah smiled at the customers who supported her fight. The atmosphere at the Blue Plate had changed forever. What began as a struggle between an arrogant customer and a determined waitress transformed into a collective cry for empathy and respect. Sarah now knew her fight was far from over, but she was ready to face it, for she had found her voice and her dignity. The battle wasn't over, but victory was within reach. The weeks following the confrontation at the Blue Plate were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. What began as a personal battle in a restaurant transformed into a movement of support among customers and staff. The atmosphere around Sarah shifted, becoming more positive and welcoming, a reflection of the dignity everyone was beginning to value. Thomas Abernathy, on the other hand, now found himself in a defensive position, his influence over the restaurant diminishing after the exposure of his arrogance. One Thursday morning, as she prepared for work, Sarah reflected on her journey. In the beginning, she felt invisible, but now she had become a woman who defended not only herself, but the dignity of everyone around her. Upon arriving at the restaurant, she was greeted with smiles and warm welcomes. Priya, her friend and colleague, approached with enthusiasm. "You won't believe it. The manager decided to implement training on respect and dignity among all employees. He mentioned you as an inspiration," Priya exclaimed, brightening Sarah's day even more. "That's incredible, Priya. I didn't know something like this could come from such a difficult moment," Sarah replied, feeling a wave of hope and satisfaction. Her personal struggle was transforming into a significant cultural shift in the workplace. The training was scheduled for the following week, and anticipation grew among the staff. Sarah dedicated herself to inspiring them, sharing her experiences and encouraging the team to unite around the new goal. Team spirit began to flourish. Employees exchanged stories about moments of disrespect and discussed how they could create a welcoming space. On the day of the training, the manager, visibly animated, began the session by talking about the importance of respect and empathy. When it was Sarah's turn to share her story, she stood up, feeling adrenaline course through her veins. One day, I saw dignity being disrespected in our workplace. I realized that true strength doesn't come from power, but from our commitment to mutual respect. Sarah began, her voice clear. We are not just employees. We are people, and each of us deserves dignity. As she spoke, she noticed the empathy and support from her colleagues. This was a new era for the Blue Plate, and Sarah was proud to be a part of it. At the end of her speech, applause echoed through the room, and she realized she had inspired others to adopt a respectful attitude. The manager announced that the restaurant would implement a new code of conduct, emphasizing empathy and respect for everyone. Sarah felt a mix of relief and joy, realizing that her struggle had contributed to significant changes. Even if the transformation didn't happen overnight, the atmosphere at the Blue Plate began to solidify as a space of dignity. Thomas, though still appearing occasionally, became more cautious in his interactions. The culture of support and respect was taking hold, and customers noticed the difference. Sarah realized that from a personal struggle, she had created a legacy that promoted dignity and respect at all levels. As she looked around the restaurant, Sarah smiled as she saw Priya serving customers with a renewed sparkle in her eyes. In a brief moment, she reflected on how, from a painful experience, a new strength and a new beginning had emerged. Her fight wasn't over yet, but what once seemed an insurmountable challenge was now an opportunity for growth and change. Finally, dignity was being restored, and Sarah was ready to continue this journey.